Hello, and welcome to Libraries and Correctives. My name is Ariel Lapira. I'm the Curator and Director of Programs at the Veralist Center for Art and Politics, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's program, co-hosted with Asia Art Archives in Hong Kong. You'll hear from my co-host and moderator, Oscar Arsoy, in just a few minutes, but first a few words about the Veralist Center and our programming. The Veralist Center is a platform for public scholarship on the political capacity of art at the New School. We champion the arts as expressions of political moments from which they emerge, and consider the intersection between art and politics as a space where new forms of civic engagement must be developed. Be it at the New School or from our homes, as I do so this morning in Brooklyn, we acknowledge that our work and assembly spaces occupy the unceded territory of the Lenape people. We recognize the Lenape as the custodians and stewards of this land and pay respect to their ancestors, past, present, and future. This acknowledgement is not acceptance or resignation to settler colonialism histories and enduring structures, but a means of building relationships towards Indigenous sovereignty. In the chat, you'll find a link to a map and more information about the Indigenous people and the land you're joining us to from today. Our work at the Veralist Center unfolds as a 2-year iterative biennial with various manifestations around a particularly pressing topic, or focus theme as we call it. Correction is that theme, and for one more year, we'll continue to explore the perils and potentials of political, social, and metaphorical implications of correction. Correction permeates through all of the Veralist Center programs, our seminars, exhibitions, artist fellowships, a robust online and print publishing initiative, and the Jane Lombard Prize for Art and Social Justice. The focus theme is an opportunity to investigate the contradictions of correction, making space not only to consider existing histories, systems, and modes, but also to challenge our position in relationship to the act of correcting. Accordingly, the asterisk at the end of it holds space for future annotations. Launched in the Veralist Center's 30th year, the theme is also a call for adjustments, revisions, and course correction for the organization as we take up the demands and challenges of our moment. Which brings me to libraries, which at least here in the United States are being systematically underfunded and under attack by right-wing conservatives. So too today's program, you'll hear from various different libraries working in other political realities. But closer to home, the Veralist Center Fellows Library is a collection of publications by each of the 44 fellows the Veralist Center has hosted over its 30th history and counting. It celebrates and makes available the rigorous research and wide-ranging work of our fellows. The library was inaugurated during the 2022 and 30th anniversary forum within Labor of Love Veralist Center for Art and Politics at 30, an exhibition anchored by an expansive and interactive timeline of archival and documentary materials, mapping out the center's engagement with art and politics over the last many years. The Fellows Library, with titles going back as far as 1994, features at least one publication by each fellow. Today, you'll find selected titles from the Veralist Center Fellows Library in our current exhibition at the New School, titled Center and Center Unfinished Business, and you'll hear from Morg Neguse, one of my co-curators for that exhibition, later in the program. I won't go into too much detail except to say that this program and many others are organized in conjunction with the exhibition. For more information about the exhibition, accompanying programs, you'll find that information in the chat, where you'll also see bios and more information about each of the libraries you'll hear from today. With that, I'd like to introduce my co-host and moderator, Oscar Arsoy, Senior Curator at Asia Art Archive, with whom I've had the pleasure in being in conversation about this program since September of last year, which is to say that this has been a very long time in the making. Welcome, Oscar.
Thank you so much, Ariola, and the Veralist Center for hosting us today. And thanks so much to all of you joining us from your screens, and especially our speakers, Malos Malahlela from the Keleketla Library, Akitemi from Sister Library, and Morg Neguse from CN Center of Unfinished Business for joining us today. Before we start our discussion, I'd like to say a couple of words about Asia Arts Archive and why I'm really excited about today's talk. And Real, if you could share screen, please. Perhaps I can share a couple of images from Hong Kong, and then we can take it from there. So for those of you who are less familiar with Asia Art Archive, we are an independent, not-for-profit organization based in Hong Kong. Next slide, please. In Hong Kong, we have an on-site library that has reference books, monographs, exhibition catalogs, and periodicals with a focus on recent art in Asia. And this is a library that we've been growing since the early 2000s. It's been more than 2 decades now. And most of the books that you see in these photos, they are based, they came to the Asia Art Archive with donations, and the library is free and open to the public. Next slide, please. So this is Candace, the previous slide, sorry. This is Candace, one of my colleagues browsing our zine collection. So aside from the more traditional forms of publishing, we also collect zines that are made by artists and collectives. And we also collect printed ephemera related to independent art spaces. And this really reflects about how we collect a diversity, or we try to collect a diversity of narratives and diversity of voices within the art communities that we work with. Next slide, please. In 2010, we also started building a digital archive, and this is a growing collection of primary source material that we build through our research projects and partnerships with artists and art professionals. And these collections go a little bit back in time. They extend back into the post-war period, and they reflect our research priorities as an organization. And these include performance art, exhibition histories, art writing, art pedagogy, and independent art spaces. Again, all of these materials are freely accessible on Asia Art Archive's website. Next slide, please. Last year, in 2022, we had this amazing opportunity to renovate our on-site library in Hong Kong. And I have to say that this was a dream come true. And the photograph that you are looking right now is the first public talk that we organized in the new space. It's really an example of how our library functions as a social space, as a space of gathering. So it hosts talks like this, as well as exhibitions and artistic interventions. Next slide, please. I just would like to give a couple of examples, but I'll keep this very short. For instance, this is an installation view from our most recent library exhibition about art collectives in Asia. And this is an artwork by Good School, a collective from Indonesia. Next slide, please. This is also part of the same exhibition. What you are seeing is an artwork by Pangrop Sulap from Malaysia and Silicane Collective from the Philippines, both responding to archival materials from our collections. Next slide, please. And this is the last image that I'd like to show. This is a photograph taken during a performance by Floating Projects, a collective from Hong Kong, which was really about collective artistic improvisation in the library space. After this, we can stop sharing the screen. Thank you so much, Rael. So with all these photos, what I would like to say that since the beginning of Asia Art Archive, we've always advocated for the shifting role of the archive and the shifting role of the library. For us, similar to our speakers today, the role that we have is not only about collecting resources, but playing an active role in building communities, in thinking, and in generating knowledge together. And as you can see from today's talk, we're not really alone in doing this. As a team, I have to say that we've changed and we've evolved thanks to our conversations with many, many inspiring friends and initiatives. And today is an extension of these conversations. So I'm really, really thrilled to be speaking with friends from Keleketla Library, Sister Library, and Xi'an Center of Unfinished Business. What we would like to do today is to think about these ongoing questions about the transformative potential of libraries with all the speakers today, and think about this question within the framework of Verlis Center's theme correction. And we'll be speaking about how each of the libraries they respond to very specific urgencies of their communities. So to kick off the conversation, I actually would like to start by asking everyone about their library as a site, as a physical space. How is the space organized? What is on display? And how do these speak to the values of your initiative? So I think what we would like to do is to start talking about the space, the library, the physical space. And I would like to talk about especially about how you think about Keleketla as a library that listens and that knows when to talk. This is always, something that you say when you start speaking about Keleketla Library. So I'm wondering if you can walk us through the space and speak about these ideas.
Okay. Greetings to everybody listening in, who's connected to this. My name is Malusi Malashela, co-founding artistic director of Keleketla Media Arts Project, but we are known as Keleketla Library. We started as to talk about Keleketla before we jump into what a library is, because it's very much important that Keleketla as a term is focused on. Keleketla as a term is more broken down to make sense of what kind of a library are we. We started as a student collective between me and my sort of co-director, Rangwatu Hlasane. So as students, we'll be going from each of our rooms because we were staying in a student accommodation. So the only and immediate audiences that we had at the time were other students who were staying with us at the student accommodation. 30 floors, 29 rooms of each floor. So when we started as a student collective, the idea of a library was far from thought, but it was more about students coming together to sort of understand the current times that they're in by using various sort of modes of expression, by showing films, by doing sort of performances, slam poetry, some creative writing here and there, and performances and all sorts of other sort of interactive modalities that we used during the time as students. So as we were graduating and we were moving to a more we were moving outside of the student accommodation concept into more of what Johannesburg is, what Johannesburg has to offer as a larger city. I think I'm still audible, right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so when we graduated as students into the larger city of Johannesburg, it allowed us to sort of engage with other collectives outside of the sort of immediacy of the audiences that we had as a student collective. And then when we moved, as we engaged with other artists and collectives around Johannesburg, that led us to move to the second space of Keleketla, which is the drill hall. And then the Drill Hall is a heritage site built in 1904. It was made famous for the 1956 treason trial of South Africa, where a lot of freedom fighters from across South Africa were collected and then trialed at the Drill Hall for drafting the Freedom Charter. For those who don't know, the Freedom Charter is a sort of clause that were sort of put together by the people of South Africa regarding what kind of government they require. And then this was seen as treason, of course, and then they were trialed at the Drill Hall. So Nelson Mandela, Govan Mbeki, Walter Sisulu were amongst those freedom fighters that were trialed at the Drill Hall. So it was made famous for that. And then after that, it sort of became a military site or hub for a period of time up until they evicted the site in 2000 and probably the early 2000s, at the same time while we were still sort of at the student accommodation. So the idea then for us as a library when we moved to the Drill Hall was we were shocked by the number of kids that were using the site without any cultural sort of engagement. The space had nothing to offer but just being a space. So when we moved to the Drill Hall, the idea of a library was the quickest way to access the young ones, especially the ones that were using and playing at the Drill Hall. It was the quickest way for us to sort of present ourselves into the larger community of what the inner city had to offer outside of us being students. Now we are entering more of a sort of a bigger tank, a bigger ship. So when we were there, our engagement with the kids required us to start a day-to-day library. And then this is at the time when the city library was going under renovations. And then as people might know, Johannesburg sort of takes time when it develops its own things. So the city of Johannesburg, the city library was going under construction. And then the other closest library was Hillbrow Library. But then those libraries were more focused on people coming in to sit down and read their books. It was not necessarily a library that is breathing, a library that is sort of engaging and interactive with sort of the community that surrounds it. It was more of those people who were studying for higher education that could access sort of certain subjects in those libraries. So when we created this idea of a library, for us was to make it an organic library, was to make it a living library, but of course it was to make it accessible to the immediate audience that we wanted, meaning the kids that were in the neighborhood. That means the library had to cater for them. From the subject that they were studying in schools, but other extramural activity. That's when we introduced the idea of, an after-school program, from creative writing to theater making, to radio making, to festivals, to choirs, to sort of poster making, publishing, and so forth. So we introduced this organic library that breathes and sort of creates its own content, and that produces its own content, not outside of itself, but within a community, within the larger community, using the kids as a point of departure, and then engaging into sort of audiences of our own age and beyond. Since the Draw Hall itself is a heritage site, it allowed us to sort of engage with other sort of tourism trialists that were trialed at the Draw Hall, meaning sort of it was an intergenerational sort of programming that we introduced there, from how the kids introduced us to their parents, and how the kids introduced us to the immediate schools around the Drill Hall, but also how the kids introduced us to sort of the spider web to the rest of the community, and then how the community knew that the Drill Hall had a day-to-day library with an after-school program, and then it caters to such people. So it became more of a living, breathing library because of the amount of people that were engaging with the site, because of the amount of people that were going in and out of the space, but also that the Drill Hall introduced other multi-spaces that we used sort of to create a barter system, because all these kids required a process of facilitation. All these kids required a process of attention, and all these kids required a process of sensitivity, because the idea of a living library is an idea of a library that scaffolds information. Over time, it can tell the difference on how these kids are progressing. So the other spaces at the Draw Hall introduced this barter system that allowed us to invite different artists within all these modes of expression that I've mentioned, from theater all the way to radio making. And then they'll use the studio spaces that are available. And then within that barter exchange, they'll sort of create various levels of programming within the library, which catered to all these sort of realms that the kids were introducing. And then these pictures, as you guys can see, this is the Draw Hall, and then this is the public square. This is where sort of the public interaction, public engagement with parents, with the communities, with the businesses around the inner city, because also such gatherings require other sort of resources around it, from food to refreshments, to security, to all these sort of other subjects. When you organize an event, they're not necessarily visible. And then this creates sort of an economy within this building. But then the issue is also that the building itself is a building that belongs to the city of Johannesburg because of its level of how it's neglected. This also introduced another aspect of what our library is, meaning outside of creating programs within this heritage site and introducing the history of this heritage site within our programs by interrogating sort of the context of what this building means in the inner city. It also introduced the idea of us being landlords by bringing this artists to occupy all these endless studio spaces that we have. Also had introduced a level of overseeing and having an oversight, and being a custodian and being sort of some technical landlord. That is it. It sort of jumped on us that we had to care for the community, but at the same time, we had to care for the building, realizing that the electricity and water bills were there, realizing that we require security and all this cleaning and all these other services. But then the city of Johannesburg is not catering to such services, and it becomes more of a very complex and very
we may have lost Milos due to his internet connection. So perhaps, Özge, we can keep going and we'll have him come back.
Sure.
I'm back in my.
Hi.
Oh, you're back. Good.
Hi.
Hello, am I still audible?
Yeah, you
yes.
are good.
Milos, maybe you've been speaking about the drill hole, and it's also
Yeah, we can go to the next slide.
Oh yes, please.
So I continue. Okay, this is the drill hall. Can you go back to the one with the sort of taxis with the cars parked in the public square? Just before this image, yes. So if you guys, this is the biggest threat that we had to a public space in the inner city, especially a public space that is used by mostly the youth in the inner city. And then is that in the inner city, space is quite a resource and no empty space is left vacant. It's always going to be occupied by some form of another. And then the drill hall public square was occupied by this sort of taxis, which are the biggest modes of transport that we have in the inner city. So they don't have enough parking lots, and then they took over this site. And then this became that idea when I was saying that being landlords at the same time while creating programs with the kids in the inner city and our own sort of initiated programs, we still had to counter certain level of decay, like this site that you are looking at right now. This is a form of decay of a heritage site that is overlooked by the city of Johannesburg. This is administrative violence that is happening on the. Hello, I'm going to remove my camera.
Okay, Milos, we can hear you now.
Okay, so the internet, because of the load shedding, keeps going in and out.
Of course.
So this is the biggest threat, like I was saying, we had regarding the programming parallel to a site that is falling apart and that is decaying. And then that's when we moved out of this heritage site in 2015, and we moved to our current space now, which is on the industrial side of Johannesburg, and it separates itself from our work with the kids, but focusing more on the administrative and then creating sort of a stronghold and capacitating Keleketla administratively from the board level, also to how we get to create and produce programs. But then this space also created a different thought of us resolving to engage in the city of Johannesburg to fight for this drill hall, to fight for this heritage site. So it goes back to its original mandate, which is supposed to be heritage education and cultural practices, and then not a site which is occupied beyond this level, and then is occupied to a point that is dangerous to the people who are occupying the drill hall, but also is dangerous to the kids that come to the site and engage with the site.
Thanks so much, Milos. Especially, the administrative violence and what you've been speaking about, the conversations about heritage in Johannesburg. These are the things that I would look to go back to later in our conversation, especially when we discuss the ideas or the references of correction in your practice. But maybe for now, Aki, we can continue with you with Sister Library. And in your case, Sister Library started as a traveling artwork. And then you decided to open a permanent space in Mumbai. So I'm wondering if you can tell us about how the form and the format of Sister Library have changed over time, and how the library looks like right now.
Before we start, I want to acknowledge my ancestors and the spirit guides for bringing us together to witness each other's works, as well as all the people who are tuned in to listen to us. And I give thanks to the VLC as well as the Asia Art Archive. I'm grateful to have this space and the very mindfully put together practitioners as well for this event. My name is Akitami. I am an Indigenous woman. It is important for me to say that because it kind of gives the context of why libraries for me was an important space to start. Maybe we can start sharing the slides. the images that I'd shared earlier. I have been working in community with different groups of people, and we've been doing reading interventions in different parts of the city. And we run an artist-run center in Dharavi called Dharavi Art Room, which is one of the densest places in the planet. And from all of these exercises that we would do with children, with adults, with college students, but also with people who would just pass by a bus stop and find it turned into a reading space, I realized that people were not really drawn to books written by women. Even when they would ask me to recommend them a reading on a particular theme. And if I suggested them a work that was written by a woman, then they would not really want to read it. And that was kind of peculiar for me. And then I wanted to delve into why might that be. And I started looking at the books that I read growing up and what was prescribed reading for me. And that is when I decided to read women exclusively, when I understood that everything that we are reading in school and in colleges are mostly men. There'll be hardly any women's work. And the more I thought about it, the more it became imperative for me to start reading women consciously, and it became a practice. I think this was around 7 or 8 years back. And that is how the collection grew. All the books that I was reading filled my house, and I started sharing it with my friends, and I started making a tiny diary of the borrowers. And then soon I started thinking about how important it is to have more people have access to the works that I had collected, because the works that I found myself gravitating towards were also books that would never be prescribed reading, or books that would not be seen as something that would be valuable in maybe a university setting or even in a popular bookshop. The reasons that I could get my hands on these books was because, like I mentioned, we've been doing reading interventions, and one part of the reading interventions with Bombay Underground has been working with street booksellers in Bombay. And there's a lot of policies and laws that have been put in place where people are not allowed to sell things on street. There's a very stringent Vendors Act, and I think it was 10 years back when the authorities in Bombay started clearing out the booksellers from the streets and started throwing away a lot of their books. And it was during that time we, as Bombay Underground, as artists, we put together monies to buy huge chunks of books from them. And since then, we've always found solidarity and friendship and connection with them. And like over the years, they have nurtured me with the best books that they have. And that is how I could have access to all the books that I have today. And that is how it changed the way I think and the way I have been able to articulate the way I think as well. It has been a tremendous guiding force for my life. And yeah, so the collection grew, and that is how I started traveling to different cities with the motivation to share the works with different people from different places. And I did a year of traveling I just did the major cities in India, because as an indigenous woman, it's really difficult for me to go to spaces that are not cities. Cities are still easier for me because I can still do public transport and things like that. And it gets more and more difficult once you go to the interiors of the spaces. And after having traveled for a year, when I was in London, it gave me like that distance. I was doing a residency, and it gave me the distance to really think about a space, a possibility to create a space that would be there permanently for people to come and visit. And it also, I think, like being away from this kind of like super hierarchical space also gave me the space to be really strong and like actually desire for a space like this. And then there were like many emails and phone calls and messages that people who visited the library when we were traveling as an installation to different places would write to me about their desire to like have access to these works, or like them wanting to bring a friend to see the works and spend more time. And it was a big motivation for me, that realization that it was not just me, but there was a community that also desired a space like this. And then I started a crowdfunder, and we had monies that were contributed by everyone from across the world. And when we had monies that was enough for us to pay the rent for a year for a space in Bombay, we started the library. When I started the library, I got a lot of emails from researchers saying that this is the first library of its kind in South Asia, which is a community-run, independent, and a feminist library. And previously, there hasn't been a library of this kind, which is not run by a foundation or a university, and is a women's library. And then slowly the library also became not just a space to look at the works and celebrate the works of women, but I think like from the very start, like it was a space of doing too. Like even when we would travel as installations to different places, or when we were at the Kochi Biennale, it was a space of doing, in the sense that we would be interacting with the works and celebrating the works of women, but also thinking together and reading together. And then, so when we have our own space now, we have like various things that we do that are on schedule, like the feminist movie night, the Mahila Mandali, which is like a full moon circle where women sit together and we just talk. And we also started a press where we publish newspapers called Sister Times. Asiat Archive has a couple of Sister Times. And maybe Keleketla also has some of our zines. But yeah, we publish our own newspapers, which is centered on women, and every centerfold is a poster of a feminist foremother. The picture that you're looking at right now is a picture of Savitribai Phule, and I want to raise up her name and celebrate her, because if she wasn't here, if she did not do the work that she did, then we would not have women ever going to school. And this is where like caste and race comes into play, because of the way caste has been structured. Everything that is cerebral, so reading, writing, thinking, are things that only Brahmins, while like at the top of the caste hierarchy, are supposed to be doing, and people at the bottom are not allowed to do it. And so Savitribai was the woman who started the first school for girls. And she was a Bahujan woman, so she came from a historically oppressed community, and yet she created a stir, and she challenged everything, and she corrected she corrected the mess that was there for thousands of years. So when we talk about indigeneity in the context of South Asia, it is a resistance that has lived for 4,000 years. We're still resisting, we're still here, and we have our foremothers who have guided us. And so we celebrate our foremothers, we celebrate women specifically from Dalit and indigenous histories that are overlooked and overshadowed. And yeah, so one of the works that we've also done to celebrate Savitrimai's work is our fellowship program, which is called Walking with Savitribai. But it speaks to the walk that she would do every day from her house to the school that she started, where people would hurl stones at her and rubbish every day. So she would have to carry a new sari to change into when she'd reach the school before she'd start teaching. And our fellowship program is called Working with Savitribai, where we support young girls from disenfranchised communities and from homegrown communities like Dharavi, where they go, we support them to go from school through college through university. We cover their university and college fees and school fees, but we also support them with a small stipend. That is the press in the library. And next to it, you will see a picture that was made during one of the open access sessions. And yeah, I think I kind of answered your question about the library traveling and how we are in Bombay now. But I'd also like to say that The reason the library is the way it looks and it is the way it is and the way it functions is because we are truly independent in the sense that we have no funders, we have no patrons, we have not been supported by anyone, and it has been a conscious decision to have that as a space which is run collectively by monies that is coming from different places as support from different people. So please support us. You'll find the links in the chat, and we continue to travel even after having, these are our girls from working with Savitri, my fellowship. Even after having the space, we have been able to travel to many different spaces. We have been able to not just travel through India. We in fact going to be traveling next month again to the indigenous country. We're going to the northeast to Manipur, Tripura, and Mizoram. This is a picture from Basel, where it was installed last month at the Basel Theatre. And so we continue to travel, and we continue to build solidarities and networks and friendship and sisterhood.
Thanks so much, Yuki. The way that you were talking about, how you work at the intersection of different interpretations of feminisms, but as well as issues around caste and class, it's something that we really should go back to maybe later in the conversation. It's something that I really want to pick up a little bit more and hear more from you. But maybe for now, we can move to Marg. Marg, thanks for joining us again. Aki talked about the idea of the mobile and itinerant libraries. And I know that this is something that you share with Sister Library for the past 6 years for the Center of Unfinished Business. The first time I saw it, it was actually in Hong Kong. The first time I saw your library, it was at Parasite, a sister not-for-profit organization here in Hong Kong. And now, as Ariola said, you have a library at the Veralist Center in New York. So these are some of the examples about how you move your library around and how you collaborate with different organizations to display selections from your library. So what I want to ask you is, how different does Sian's library look like every single time it travels? Do you have a core selection of books and a particular display format in mind, or do you always adapt to the host organization?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question, and thank you for the invitation to VLC and AAA for organizing this event. We are very happy to collaborate also with the Veralist Center with our Center of Unfinished Business. And so there's so many aspects about the reading room that I want to share with you. Yeah, that's perfect that you're sharing some images. So the CN Center of Unfinished Business is a reading room, a traveling reading room, as you already mentioned, focusing on colonialism, colonial traces. And so just to walk you through how we curated and how it is attached to our key value, which is accessibility. At the end, we always think about and think around what accessibility could mean and how it changes through different perspectives. And so what you see as you approach the reading room is always a shelf structure with various book formats, meaning it contains catalogs, journals, manifestos, novels, and so on, with many different subjects. So it's not concentrated on colonialism per se, so that it doesn't mean that we don't have books with colonialism, but we also do have, as you can also see on the image, for example, books on traveling or, expressionism and different topics, fashion, architecture, everything. yeah. And so since the topic of colonialism is a very heavy and also painful topic, for us it is very important to be very careful about how we design the reading room, that it doesn't become a comfortable reading corner, or like that you have a cozy atmosphere like in a cafe. Sometimes you find seating options and yeah, if we decide to include seating options, they are very practical and minimalistic. And so it often, the design of the shelf structure very often requires visitors to bend or to stretch to get to the books. So with the reading room, there's always a physical effort to get to the content. And so you can also see the variations now. We did for the very first edition of the Center of Unfinished Business in 2017 at the IFA Gallery in Berlin. We designed an aluminum structure, which we are still using, and which is, as a matter of fact, as we are celebrating now our 10th anniversary, as we thought about what exactly, that's the aluminium structure. We thought about what a special edition could be for the center, and thought it would be nice to return to the very first exhibition venue. So we have now the Center of Unfinished Business on display there in Berlin at the IFA Gallery, as well as at the Verylist Center in New York. And so that's also a quality of the reading room, that you can show it at many venues at the same time. And so we have this, let's say, original structure, shelf structure, that we are using, but we are often developing new shelf structures with the respective institution that invites us to show the center, using already existing materials that then subsequently can be reused in other ways as well. On the one hand, of course, we are concerned with the aspect of sustainability, but on the other hand, we also want to design a shelf structure that fits the premises of the institution. So yeah, in addition to that, there's also always wall text, which is sometimes also integrated into the shelf structure, which describes the project. Sometimes you see the title says Center of Unfinished Business, or Welcome to the Center of Unfinished Business, and then following the text, which describes that the reading room focuses on colonial legacies, and something very important for us is that it is not an instruction. It just describes what the project is about. And so it is open to the visitors how they engage or how they enter the reading room. And as you already also saw it on the last slide, something we always do is we put post-its in it and also pens, so the visitors can write down their thoughts and questions they have while engaging with the books. And it's also nice for us to keep track on what they were thinking of or what the questions were. And sometimes really nice, because sometimes someone writes one question and pin it into a book, or as you can see it on the shelf structure, and then someone else reacts to that, and then a little conversation develops out of that. So yeah, I think that's it for the first, as a rough overview.
Great, thank you, Mark. I think, for from all of you, what I'm hearing is that there are three key main commonalities across these libraries that we're talking about. The first one is accessibility. libraries at sites that could gather, that have the potential to gather different communities. The second one is knowledge production. So not only collecting resources, publications, stories, but also Aki, you talked about printing newsletters. Malos was speaking about printing books and magazines and records. And I know Mayark Sian also publishes magazines, on top of the library project as well. And I would say the last point is really about activation. All of you are involved in developing programs, conversations, performances, and these gatherings always respond to specific urgencies emerging from your own communities. And this leads me to my second question, which is about the title of today's talk. For the title, we use the phrase libraries as correctives. And the idea behind the title is that all the libraries that we're talking about today are founded in response to something that's lacking or something that needs to be improved, or there's urgency about changing things or actively instituting things. So I would like to ask everyone about how you see your own library as a site or a tool for correction, and what are the tensions around the word correction for you. And Aki, maybe we can start with you. I would like to go back to you. You mentioned that you started the sister library as an extension of your idea of reading women writers exclusively. And you mentioned that this was a response to the lack of representation of women writers in libraries and reading rooms that you were familiar with. But you also mentioned that your work is not necessarily part of the mainstream feminist movement in India, and then that you really want to go beyond the boundaries of caste and class. So given this context, I'm curious how the meaning of correction has changed for you since you started the library.
I mean, like, to even look at what Sister Library is in its physical form is very distant from the idea of library as there is when you go to a library in India or in South Asia, or even in Europe and in the Turtle Island. You'd see like huge spaces and high walls, high ceilings, and like, the idea of library, the architecture of library and the aesthetic of a library is very distant from what Sister Library is, because it is hot pink and it is, it's like, it has books on one of the walls, but it is also a press, and we also have a radio, and we have a stack of newspapers that's being circulated. And I think it's also that understanding of what library is as a space of learning and a space of epistemology, and how that space was never afforded to people like me, like, to indigenous peoples who are still seen as savages because of the scriptures. The caste in the scriptures still see us, or like, all the caste in the scriptures say that we are savages and we were killed by their gods and goddesses. And so when you're living in the context where every festival, every major festival is a celebration of the killing of elder, indigenous elder, and where you are still perceived as being like really like dumb and not capable of producing knowledge or not capable of understanding things. So the library is a kind of a space. I think for me, it did not come initially as a primary thought when I put it together, or my desire to start reading text that was not available to me. But slowly over the years, I understand that maybe the need came from a space of not having, not feeling at ease in spaces like this, which are essentially designed to keep people like us away, or keep people like us feeling uncomfortable within these spaces that are actually supposed to be spaces that hold tremendous knowledge and power. And like I earlier said, thinking and doing and creating knowledge is confined to a certain caste, that is the Brahmins. And so it can be seen like even today, like if you go to universities, you'll see major part of people who are like in the teaching faculty or like even amongst the students. Maybe you could do a survey at the new school also. You'll see that they are majorly people who are the oppressor caste, the upper caste. And so, yeah, the desire wasn't to like correct the system. The desire was to build our own and to have our own space, and inadvertently just have a space that might challenge these existing spaces just by us existing. And in a way, maybe that's also my life. It's like this existing is potent enough to disrupt. Yeah, I think that answers your question.
Thank you, Aki. There's also a question in the chat that maybe we can go back to later. It's basically about how you relate to other community library projects. It's something that I wanted to ask later in the conversation about what type of alliances have you've been building over time. So maybe we can go back to that question. But for now, I think I would like to invite Malos. Malos, can you hear me? I know that you're...
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. I'm wondering if we could go back to the conversation about the work that you've been doing, especially related to Drill Hall. Especially, there are two questions that I've been thinking about when it comes to the framework that the Veralist Center has provided us. Two questions. One, how do we teach or learn through corrections? And what are we correcting towards and along which measure? So for me, I would love to hear more from you, and especially about the work that you do as a bridge between cultural production, bureaucracy, and heritage, and especially in regards to your work around Drill Hall. So I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about that and how you interpret the term correction itself.
Okay. Again, thanks for this opportunity. So, I mean, it's very interesting when we, especially as a cultural worker working within communities, somehow it falls on one's shoulders to see that they bring a certain level of standard within the place that they work from. And it always comes from necessarily the idea to want to create and the idea to not be stagnant all the time, but try and offer something to the world, try and serve in a way. And then like when we started as students, we never had this foresight of what we're trying to do, that 20 years later we'll be here in our own sort of building, trying to sort of, again, still sustain and produce what we're trying to produce. So when the Drill Hall is very much important to the idea of what probably correction could be. And then sometimes correction means demolition, meaning we have to start from scratch. And then it's very much important to have a blank slate to start from. And then the Drill Hall, the work that we're doing at the Drill Hall, because our library is a living organism, when it detached itself from the infrastructure that gave it gave the name power, because Keleketla is a call and response. Keleketla is around storytelling. It begins with the storyteller in a space that is comfortable for people to engage in. And then they call out the name 3 times to show that they are listening. And then the way the community around the Drill Hall echoed to the certain level of programming and production that we were doing, especially when parents knew what their kids were doing after school, especially when the teachers knew what kind of programming we're offering at the school, vice versa, that Keleketla in its own capacity could offer certain level of facilitators. For example, we sort of also offered a facilitator to take over the school choir when the teacher who taught the choir left the school. Within our own capacity, we offered a facilitator to conduct the school choir as part of our programming so they could see themselves to actualization. So the idea of correction, sometimes I feel like even when we we work with the history of the drill hall around the 1956 treason trial, which is a sort of a very washed away treason trial because of the number of people that were sort of trialed at the site. A lot of people like to celebrate individualism within collectives. That's why Nelson Mandela is sort of celebrated when the Rivonia trial happened after the treason trial, because of fewer people that were there. So the treason trial, even when we tried to, create content around this history, this specific point of history that relates a lot to South African history, and then the turning point in 94 also, and then introduced sort of this printed publication into the school's curriculum. That in itself is a level of correction that we're trying to do in the curriculum itself, in a formal school curriculum around a history aspect that is missing within the history schools. So how the kids will come to the draw hall and engage with some of the trialists who are super in their age group, like Ahmed Kathrade, who passed away, also was one of the trialists. He was there as primary source to interrogate the kids within their own history curriculum, but also develop a new sort of curriculum of understanding South African history, but in a different way outside of the classroom. That will happen at the draw hall. So the draw hall in itself, outside of the physical architectural structure, it seeks to also, within our programming that we gave to the draw hall, that it seeks to correct even schools' curriculums around, but also form some sense of alliances. And I like the term alliances, because to sustain and to survive this long, COVID happened, load shedding is one of those things that are disabling South Africa right now. So to work under certain, level of pressures that come from the socio-economic, political sort of sphere. And then it always lands on cultural workers, because we work within communities. So some of these policies that fail to reach communities, it creates a destruction, a very destructive level there. And then part of our existence also, and I like what Sister Library said, the existence of such practices that we do seeks to also criticize the collapse or the lack of certain things that are happening, and even other institutions that we have. So the draw hall then in itself, for us, we're trying to correct it from the land base. The lease is an issue. The lease has been contested within the owners of the land between the City of Johannesburg and the National Department of Public Works. Keleketla inserted itself within this conversation within formal sort of government offices and introduced this conversation about the lease is very much important to liberate the draw hall from the decaying space that is happening in, and then to sort of create a new version of what the draw hall could be. And then this is where we come in with some of the relationship that we trying to establish with local architects, of course, higher education and other sort of artists and independent thinkers, and also externally to garner support for trustees and donors. And by this, we also practice in soft power. That's why when we overseas, or when we're in Europe or in other countries, the biggest part of it is soft power is cultural power, power to extract resources, also to emphasize your own sort of point in the locale that you come from, but also influence your government. Because it's very much important that our government is influenced to think differently, because you were speaking of corruption earlier. And corruption is one of those things that really decapitating a society. Right now, if, for example, if Johannesburg never had a mayor that lived 5 years within his period of post, so Johannesburg would have been, in this sort of level of thinking. But now, because the mayor has always been 1 year, 2 years, 3 years for quite a long period of time, Johannesburg never really had a foresight and a vision. And then the draw hall's violence that is happening administratively comes from the top down because of the administrative failures and the backlog of what's happening within the city infrastructures and political sort of spheres. And then what we trying to do is also educate as part of that correction level. When we took some of the city officials to Kassel last year to show them a difference, practices and cultural heritage sites that are maintained, and the importance of those cultural spaces to create tourism, but also create a level of influx and connectivity within South Africa, but within Africa as a whole. So part of the correction is also correcting the people in office, because sometimes they're in office without knowing what their mandate is about. And then the draw hall as a heritage site, we're trying to then sort out the lease with the City of Johannesburg, but also speak to the UNESCO, for example. We would try to do so with UNESCO Germany, creating all these alliances to influence the UNESCO South Africa, because UNESCO South Africa is tied in within political elements, so it also has a sort of limited way of thinking. So then the work that we're doing around the draw hall seeks to sort of create this across-department conversation that will allow, because then the issues that we have, they are too complex for one department or one government to handle. it requires different spheres of government, different cultural departments to come together to sort of unpack the issues that are happening within the draw hall and then within the outskirts of the draw hall, but also influencing other heritage sites in the neighborhood, like the Johannesburg Art Gallery that is leaking and is falling apart to a certain degree that the works themselves have been damaged, and then many other sort of heritage sites that we have within the radius of the draw hall. So the draw hall becomes a flagship project, a correction of a city that is being fixed since it was built in the apartheid times. We still have these buildings that are still, block buildings. We don't have a new imagination, a new correction of even how the city looks itself. So then what we seek to do with the draw hall is to change it from an architectural point of view that it relates to what the kind of programmings that we do. So the spaces the new spaces that are created through architecture speaks to sort of the programming that has been sort of running at the draw hall for a certain period of time that we've been there. But also this architecture seeks to correct this xenophobic language that we have in the inner city, where when it happens, sort of the energy of the inner city is a very bad, it has a bad tonality to it. So how can we correct also even the beings that occupy these buildings, even the beings and the people that occupy this neighborhood? So it seeks to correct itself as a heritage site that was built to protect the gold rush that was happening in Johannesburg. It seeks to correct itself within over time in history as Keleketla occupies it, and it seeks to correct the neighborhood that it occupies itself in. That way, then the building speaks to the neighborhood, speaks to the program, and speaks to the schools, and speaks to the people. So it's interwebbed and interconnected within the neighborhood. And that for us becomes something that we want to fight, and it's sort of a lifelong project because of the way the city functions. It's quite an administrative nightmare. It takes a lot of resources and capacity from us to always update the city officials as they come in and out, and then operating within various political parties. Then it requires us then to speak different languages as we talk to them. So there's a level of correctiveness that is happening within sort of what I'm trying to say, even us being a library in the inner city and offering books as a point of departure, but also other activities around the library, but also then the library that seeks to build its own self that, I don't know. I mean, it's important to have an address. It's important to have a building. It's important to own such infrastructures, because we can't keep practicing in spaces that are not ours. We can't form a language in places that are not ours. So it's very much important that we find ourselves within walls, that we can have our own signatures. We can have our own way of thinking and our own way of sort of conversation, of talking, but always our own way of practicing autonomy. Like you were saying, it's very difficult to find such a sort of a thought process that we are in, because it's an independent thought process that creates its own project. It's not necessarily through open course that we keep applying for us to get money. It's more like, how do we create networks and relationships as part of institution building, but also as part of influencing and growing the dynamic of the programming of what this library could be. When we moved out of the draw hall to this new space, like I said, we just bought the new building next door. So we have more ample space to sort of practice all these different languages, but also engage people within, again, going back to the four walls and the infrastructure that we are in. So the land is very much important. The land is very much key to root ourselves and then create this change and this paradigm shift in the city of Johannesburg. So these are the sort of the level of correction. This is how we teach. And then this is how we create this measure to see various level of changes within politics, within the grassroots, and within architectural sort of settings and view of how cities develop and grow, but through culture.
Thank you, Malos. I think what your practice is speaking to is really about these different approaches to correction. Arielda also wrote in the chat box, and she said, it's about overhaul. It's about completely changing something to imagine something from scratch, and not necessarily that's incremental change or revisionism. And I'd like to go back to Mayark, and actually, Mayark, ask for your opinion about your interpretation of change. And maybe specifically, we can start with the title of the project, right? The Unfinished Business. It actually makes me think of something that is not yet dealt with, or something that is still disruptive, but also something that cannot be complete or completely corrected, so to speak. So I'm also thinking about the potential of creating and completing a library on colonialism, which would be an idea that would not be easily possible. So maybe you could say a little bit more about your interpretation of this term of correction itself.
So we always thought of the Center of Unfinished Business not as a correction, but more as a intervention into the museum space. Very often we are invited by museums for an exhibition, so or to show the reading room in the context of an exhibition. But we see ourselves more as intervening these spaces in the way how we approach the topic of colonialism and colonial legacies, because the books that are contained in the library, in the reading room, they come from two different libraries or book holdings, which are, of course, our own holdings from CN. We have at our office in Berlin a collection of books with books focusing, of course, as CN has a focus on visual arts from African perspectives. This is also reflected in the books that we have. So we bring books from our holdings, but then also we, the CN team, go into the institution holdings and the libraries and look through their shelves and collect books for the reading room. And ideally, we also include or invite a local perspective, which could be a bookstore or grassroots organization, or also a community library with a specific focus in their book collection to bring in some of their books. So the approach, our approach is to have all these books together in the reading room, and then also have they are in dialogue. So for us, it was very important to have different perspectives on that subject. And so it's more like saying that it isn't possible to discuss this this subject of colonialism or colonial legacies just from one perspective, but you need more sources or more perspectives. And this is also related to that there cannot be just one canon, and that it isn't possible to think history in a linear way, right? So another form, I think, of maybe correcting, if you want to use that word, is having all these books with wide-ranging topics. So we have books on fashion, on cooking, on architecture, on everything, because we try to make a statement, I don't know, with that colonialism has affected all our, well, I have to repeat, sorry, that it has affected all areas of our lives and not just one aspect of our life. And so it cannot be constrained to just one aspect or one area. And so it was very important for us from the very beginning to not just create a set of reference books on colonialism, because that would have to suggested that it is complete or consistent, and that is something that isn't possible, as we think. And so this is also the reason why we think it's not a library, but a reading room, because for that reason. And then also on top of that, we do not sort the books by alphabet or author or genre or anything. And we also do not provide the visitors with a list and overview with all the books that are contained, but in the reading room. So this is the reason why it's not a library. And so I think for us, what's more important is the aspect of intervening these spaces and show different approaches on how they that they have to revisit their methodologies. And so it is important for us to engage with other local communities as well, with other grassroots organizations, and to be in discussion with them. So, yeah.
Thank you, Mark. I'm aware of time. We have about 15 minutes left, and we have some questions, both in the Q&A box and the chat box. So I'll try to combine some of these questions, if I may. One thing that I would like to ask all of you is actually a question from Don Valeski that is in the Q&A box. And they're asking, what are the corrective vessels that you built within your para-organizations that address and activate accountability within your collectives? So I think speaking about the content, speaking about the communities that we work with, we've been addressing correction from this very particular perspective, but it would be also great to think more about how you are functioning and how you are thinking about correcting things with your team, with your colleagues, and with your friends within your organization. So that could be one question that we can think about. And in my opinion, that could also be related to how you are thinking about the alliances that you've been building with the other community libraries, and what are the things that you've been learning from the peer libraries. So if you would like to answer either of these questions, please feel free to do so. And Aki, shall we start with you?
Yes. For us, we are, like I mentioned earlier, that we are independent. We have no one who is a paid staff. Everyone is voluntarily participating in the running of the library. So when it comes to transparency and accountability, it's a space of love. And so, the reason that we do it is because we believe in the space. We believe in having the space because the space wasn't there for people like us. And most of the people who come to the space are also people who come from disenfranchised communities and backgrounds. And I very carefully decided to build the space in Bandra, which is one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Bombay, because there is this very tactical way of keeping us outside of the city spaces, and our work infringes. And we are not tolerated to be in spaces which are of comfort for people who are our oppressors. And it is important for us to claim our space in the most wealthiest part of Bombay and our work to be present in this space. And because of just doing that, we have had to move various locations in Bandra where people are asked, we are asked by the society to pack up and leave because they don't feel comfortable with the kind of people who visit the library. And most of the women who visit the library are, by people who they say are causing them discomfort, are women who work in their homes in Bandra, and they come for relief and respite in the library. So I think when it comes to making accountability checks and things like that, it does not even occur to us because everything is built out of love and everything is built for sisterhood. Even when we are traveling to different spaces, we make it a point to talk about caste and talk about racism, talk about indigeneity in India, because these are the things that are only allowed for oppressors to talk about, like an Arundhati Roy or I don't know, all these celebrated so-called feminists are allowed to talk about our lives and write about our lives and then get popular writing about us. But when we are talking about ourselves and when we are gathering and coming together and building our own spaces, like when I'm traveling to the Northeast with the library, I'm not going there to impart knowledge. Like we sit down together, we discuss about how the library is going to be affected in whatever place we are going to, and we create a space together. Like the whole idea is to create it together, even when I'm traveling to like other parts. And I try to do it in a way that I understand, and I think it is honorable to me, and it has no, I mean, people have to understand that it is my work, end of the day. It does not come from a foundation that is supporting this library, or from foundation or a university that owns this library. It's my work. And because of my lived reality and the circumstances that I've gone through, I try to keep it as simple and as approachable and as easy to have an understanding of the space for oppressors also, because we've always believed that we need conversation, we need a space of exchange. So although our space does celebrate Indigenous women and Dalit women, it's also open for other people to come and celebrate works of Indigenous women and Dalit women, along with other fabulous, amazing writings that are done by women and other works as well. Sorry, I'm a bit swayed. But yeah, like we don't really have those measures that are seen in other foundations or like spaces, like organizations that are like non-profit organizations that might have like a model of accountability and checks and balances. Everything we do is like open. We sit in a circle, we discuss about our events, we discuss how to do it, we discuss about the monies that we have, and we basically don't have any monies. The way we run is either asking for monies from people, and you can go back to our crowdfunder and you can see that over the past 8 years, we have had like the same amount of money. It does not really help run the library and the fellowship program, where we have our girls. Every year we have a fresh batch of girls joining universities. These are girls who are going to universities for the very first time in their entire families. They're first generation university going kids. And the monies it's like non-existent monies. The monies come from selling my work, to be honest, like to be frank. I sell my work, I put the monies back into the running of the library. So it's I'm just like a little annoyed and irritated with some responses that I can see. But yeah, it's very transparent. It's open for everyone to come and understand and learn and share. And it's also difficult. It is very, very difficult to run a space like this in South Asia because of what is happening, and also because of me being the person who has initiated a space like this, because there hasn't been a space like this. There hasn't been an open space for everyone to come and access, and a space that is open for everyone to come and participate. And there has been a lot of attack and hate as well that we have had to deal with. And, just moving the library across different places in the neighborhood as well, which is hard work. But thankfully, we have our community, and we do it. We get things done. Yeah, I don't know if I answered you. I'm just a little annoyed.
No, thank you, Aki. I think it's also about having the stamina to continue, because sometimes we receive more difficult questions. Sometimes we do the work. Sometimes we learn from the other colleagues. So it's always we're all works in progress, to so to speak. So I think it's great to hear your honest answer about that.
I just want to add one more thing. Sorry.
No, please.
And it is pink because, like I said, it is my work, and I work with this color, and it is striking, and it is something that is captivating as a color to me, and it invites attention. I want this person who is asking and attacking me with so much, I don't know, I don't know why, like with violence, and it is not appreciated, but here is your answer. And it is also widely available for anyone to read, because I've been interviewed millions of times about why this color. And I think, why not? Like, why should all the libraries be like white boxes? Like, come on, it's like so tiring. Okay, that was the last thing I wanted to say. And thank you for giving me the space to just ramble.
No, of course, please, not at all. Malos, maybe I would like to go back to you and speak about that idea of the the internal corrective. I know that we have about 6 minutes left, so it's something maybe we can briefly touch upon. But I remember from a previous conversation how you talked about that transition from having a student collective to an organization, because you were saying that we needed to do that transition because we needed agility. We need to move faster. We needed to make decisions, in a much more agile way. So I'm wondering how you spoke about that idea of the internal corrective when it comes to this change in your format. And maybe, Mark, we can end with you if you have any responses in that regard. Malos, we can go back to you, please.
Yeah, I mean, as students, in our early 20s, now I'm turning 39 in 4 days. So I'm approaching 40 doing this, never worked in a formal institution before. So there's no formal corrective way that we dealt with the people that we have around us. And then I like what, again, going back to what Sister Library said, people like us, when we create such spaces, they are created because the base is love. And then if you have that base of love to what you're doing, you are able to fight for that. You are able to sustain through all these difficult times. So this is created out of our own desires, out of our own innate life force. And then this is what we want to introduce to this world. And for it to sustain, it has to come from the desire from those who have the vision. We started of course, as students. And then in our heydays, we're young, we do parties, we do events, we do gathering, we're artists, we do all the sort of various wild sort of projects. But when we started to work with the kids, when we moved into the draw hall, when we started to be more sort of rooted in the practice that we're doing, and then also because we came across the funding from the National Lottery that also required us to sort of formalize ourselves. So from a student collective, when we moved to the draw hall, we were still a collective, but we understood that some people, this is not their vision. They were just riding with us because we are the ones who were doing these events, but you always have these people around you. And then, of course, when you're doing cultural work, you're trying to use humans as resources because people are resources. They come with their own thinking capacity and so forth. So the reason to be in a collective is to sort of mobilize and create an energy force among all these sort of collectives around you and people around you. Some will fall apart, some will drag their feet, but accountability is through doing and through showing. So we always came early to clean. If we had an event the night before, we stayed late with the kids, we'd show demonstration. Through demonstration, you show accountability because it's your vision that you're trying to execute. You're not going to depend on somebody else. You always have to depend on yourself. That's why I can still clean now and still organize an event and send an email and run to the airport if I have to. So I know what to do from the grassroots idea of sustaining in space, but also being able to elevate to spaces of negotiations with other international institutions and so forth. So the process of accountability, for us, it was done through demonstration, through showing, because we're all learning, we're all growing, people change over time. So it's through demonstration because we're doing this space for our people. So they need that level of time and care and generosity. So there's that level that we have to operate from. Of course, it's exhausting. It's not for the faint-hearted. Those who don't have spaces, they know they're very much relaxed. That's why they could ask and pose such questions. But those who run spaces that have to open doors and close doors and then still have to pay electricity bills, still have to clean and all these other levels of things before the program and before the public interface could happen. There's that, stressful level that everybody has to go through. And then this level of poise that we are in comes from a long level of practice and engaging with people since we were students. We were working with people. Up until now, we still work with people. So we know how to judge and understand behavior of people, how to bring the best out of people, and then how to let go of those, of course, who are not part of the vision or who can't see the vision that we're trying to present. And that's how we sort of put accountability into space. And then, of course, the same accountability goes back to alliances that we do. No matter how big you are, you're a government in Germany, you still have to apply to the same sort of level of discipline that we show our people on the ground level. So, it doesn't matter. Accountability for us, we hold it on a, flat line. Thank you.
Thank you, Malos. Mark, may I ask if you have anything to add?
Just, one thing that we participated in a show called Why We Embattled at Parasite in Hong Kong. You mentioned it at the very beginning, Asker, that you saw the reading room there for the first time. And for us, this was actually a turning point in terms of how we deal with the topic of colonialism, and also how we collaborate with other institutions that are independently run, like Parasite and also AAA. And so we are currently in conversation with you and also with Parasite to think about how we can also change the approach, and also the way we deal with colonial legacies from another perspective, meaning from those very institutions, and what it means to have a space like the reading room as a retreat and a sanctuary where we can share common experiences and also questions, and where they overlap and not, because as Maloza also already said, it is important to support each other, and also to have to build these alliances. And so this is our next step with the Center of Unfinished Business right now. Yeah.
Thank you, Marek. I think this is a good point to wrap up. Before I invite Ariola back to the room, I just want to say that I think all of you keep learning from all of you, and I think we keep thinking about forms of display, forms of categorization, forms of accountability, and these are very much rooted in the practice of our work. So these are things that we negotiate on a daily basis. And I think, speaking about alliances, it's really a form of learning from each other. And I think today's conversation is really, as I was saying in the beginning, is a continuation of that. And I really hope we will keep talking to each other. But I would like to thank all of you for having these living libraries, to borrow from Malos, for the first answer that he gave. Thanks so much for creating these spaces. Thanks so much for your support for all these communities and your friendship. And maybe this is the moment where I will invite Ariola back for the final words. But thank you so much to all of you.
Thank you, Ozge. Thank you, Malos, Aki, and Murigan. Happy birthday, Malos. Let's just celebrate you for a moment. And thank you to all of you joining us from various locales and time zones. It's great to see other libraries in the chat looking for connection and collaboration. We love to see it, but we also would love to see you back at the Veritas Center. On May 1st, join us online for Correction Seminar 6, titled Indigenous Cultural Revitalization, Rematriation, and Preservation. It is a program convened with Borderlands Curatorial Fellow Larissa Nez, and it's the last seminar of our first year of Correction, which considers rematriation and the preservation of Indigenous culture, art, and land. And on May 18th, join us at the New School in person at the exhibition site, Center for Unfinished Business, with our colleagues from Contemporary and for a program titled Libraries in Practice, Tending Toward Liberation. It brings together organizers from local independent artists-run libraries and non-circulating collections, archives, reading rooms, and small presses in and around New York City to consider the roles of libraries in making space for freedom work. And that's what you've all shown us today, and we hope to keep this conversation going. We'll follow up in a couple of days with additional resources and ways of connecting you all. Thank you so much, and have a very good day. Bye-bye.